It happened so fast, I didn't even have time to react. One moment, he was trotting beside me, and the next, he was gone. That's how Alice Jameson described a moment her beloved golden retriever, Baxter, suddenly leaped off Overtoun Bridge, plunging 50 feet to his death. She wasn't the first. For over 6 decades, Overtoun Bridge has been the site of a disturbing phenomenon. Hundreds of dogs have mysteriously jumped to their deaths from the same spot. But this wasn't just some tragic coincidence. In 1994, a man threw his infant son off the bridge, claiming that the child was possessed. What was it about this centuries-old bridge that seemed to drive both animals and humans to suicide? Was there a scientific explanation, or was something far more sinister at work? The truth behind Overtoun Bridge is more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Perched on the outskirts of Dumbarton, Scotland, Overtoun Bridge is a striking Victorian-era stone bridge leading to Overtoun House, a 19th-century mansion once owned by a wealthy industrialist, James White. Locals say the estate has always had an unsettling presence. Some believe it's a thin place, a location where the veil between life and death is at its weakest. Others whisper about the ghost of Lady Overtoun, who wanders the bridge in grief, mourning the loss of her husband. But while ghost stories are common in old towns, the deaths on this bridge were very real. Since the 1950s, over 300 dogs, and possibly more, have jumped to their deaths from the same exact spot on the bridge. Even stranger, many of the surviving dogs returned and leaped again. Was it an optical illusion, a hidden force, or was something on the bridge calling them? The phenomenon first gained attention in the 1950s, when local pet owners began reporting disturbing incidents. One of the earliest known cases involved a collie named Rufus. His owner, Donald McLean, was walking him along the bridge when Rufus froze mid-step, let out a low growl, and suddenly lunged toward the edge. Before McLean could react, Rufus disappeared over the parapet, falling to the jagged rock below. McLean scrambled down the gorge to find his dog, but there was no sign of a body. At first, these jumps were dismissed as tragic accidents, but then the pattern emerged. Almost all of the dogs jumped from the same side of the bridge, leaped from the same spot, did so on clear days with no wind. As reports increased, the media gave the site a chilling nickname, the Dog Suicide Bridge. For decades, the bridge was seen as a mystery of nature, until 1994, when a horrific human tragedy unfolded. Kevin Moy, a man struggling with mental illness, arrived at Overtoun House with his wife and newborn son, Ewan. Moy had been acting strangely for months, obsessed with the idea that he was the Antichrist, and that his infant son was the devil incarnate. Then, on an October afternoon, Moy's delusions turned deadly. Without warning, he grabbed the baby and threw him over the bridge's edge. Witnesses reported hearing his wife's blood-curdling screams, followed by Moy standing motionless, staring at the ground below. When police arrived, he simply said, "I had to do it. He wasn't human." Moy was later found not guilty by reason of insanity and diagnosed with schizophrenia. But to the townspeople, his crime confirmed their worst fears. Overtoun Bridge wasn't just taking dogs anymore. It had moved on to people. In the early 2000s, experts sought a rational explanation for the bridge's deadly reputation. Animal behaviorists conducted tests and proposed a theory. The gorge beneath the bridge was home to mink, animals that release a strong musky scent. Dogs, particularly hunting breeds, might become overwhelmed by the scent and chase after it, not realizing there was a drop. The high walls of the bridge could create an optical illusion, making the landscape ahead seem like flat ground. But the theory didn't explain everything. Not all the jumping dogs were hunting breeds. Why did they all jump from the same spot? Why did some dogs survive and then return to jump again? And most chilling of all, the mink population hadn't existed there in the 1950s, when the first cases were reported. While science struggled for answers, locals turned to folklore. Some believed the bridge was haunted by Lady Overtoun, luring souls to join her in death. Others spoke of force pushing them toward the edge, like a cold hand at their back. Some visitors reported feeling overwhelmed with sorrow for no reason, as if the bridge itself was whispering to them. And then there were the voices. One Glasgow woman, unaware of the bridge's history, described walking across it when her normally timid Labrador suddenly became aggressive, barking and pulling toward the same spot. Just as quickly, the dog froze, whimpered, and backed away, as if something invisible was standing at the edge. She would later say, "It was as if he had seen something I couldn't." Despite scientific theories, folklore, and speculation, one fact remains. Overtoun Bridge is still claiming victims. The latest reported case occurred in 2022, when a couple's border collie leaped to its death, just like hundreds before it. And now, whispers have surfaced that it isn't just dogs anymore. A retired detective has come forward with an unsettling confession, one that could finally reveal the darkest truth about Overtoun Bridge. The retired detective sat across from the journalist, his fingers trembling as he lit a cigarette. The room was dimly lit, the weight of his confession pressing against the silence. "I never told anyone this before," he muttered. "But there's something they didn't put in the reports, something they didn't want to believe." The journalist leaned forward. "What is it?" The detective exhaled slowly, his gaze distant. "I heard it. The voice. Just like the others." Overtoun Bridge had already built a sinister reputation, but after the 1994 Kevin Moy incident, the locals' fear only grew. What had once been whispered folklore turned into full-blown paranoia. People started to avoid the bridge altogether. Some swore they felt an uneasy presence every time they passed by. Others, especially dog owners, refused to go near it. But then, in the mid-2000s, a new pattern emerged. People, not just dogs, began acting strangely on the bridge. There were stories of visitors suddenly feeling lightheaded, gripped by an uncontrollable urge to jump. Some backed away just in time, shaken by a sense of an invisible force pulling them toward the edge. Most of these incidents were dismissed, brushed off as vertigo, anxiety, or superstition. But then, the official reports started stacking up. Detective Callum Fraser, a seasoned officer with the Dumbarton Police, was first assigned to investigate the phenomenon in 2005, when a young woman named Emily Cairns was found unconscious near the bridge's edge. Emily, a 21-year-old college student, had been hiking with friends. They said she had been perfectly fine, laughing, taking pictures, until she stopped in the middle of the bridge. She just stood there, one friend recalled. She wasn't moving. It was like she was listening to something. Then, without warning, Emily climbed onto the stone railing and started leaning forward. Her friends barely managed to pull her back before she went over. Emily survived, but she refused to talk about what happened. When Fraser visited her in the hospital, her vacant expression sent a chill down his spine. "I don't remember climbing up," she whispered. "I just remember the voice." Fraser frowned. "What voice?" Emily hesitated before muttering. It was a woman. She kept saying, "Come home." Fraser didn't know what to make of the story. He was a skeptic, a man who relied on facts, not ghost stories. But then, the inconsistencies started to pile up. He tracked down other people who had almost jumped, or who had lost their dogs to the bridge. Many of them spoke of the same eerie sensations. A sudden feeling of sadness or despair before stepping onto the bridge. A cold breeze, even on warm days. The sensation of someone standing behind them. And, most disturbingly, a voice calling them forward. But what really unsettled Fraser was what happened next. The police department had kept official records of every known incident related to Overtoun Bridge. Fraser requested to see the case files, but when the documents arrived, he noticed something odd. Several witness testimonies were missing. A handful of reports had disappeared altogether. The record of Emily Cairns' case? Nowhere to be found. It was as if someone was trying to erase the evidence. Fraser brought it up with his supervisor, but the response was chillingly dismissive. "There's nothing to investigate. Drop it." But Fraser wasn't convinced. Something was wrong. And then the anonymous letter arrived. One night, as Fraser was leaving his office, he found a plain white envelope tucked under his car's windshield wiper. Inside was a single piece of paper, containing a short but disturbing message. "You won't find the truth in the reports. Look beneath Overtoun House." The cryptic warning made no sense, at least not at first. But when Fraser started researching Overtoun House, he uncovered something deeply unsettling. The Victorian mansion, originally built as a lavish estate, had long been rumored to be haunted. Over the years, it had been used as an asylum, a wartime hospital, and even a care home for troubled children. And in the early 1900s, a series of unexplained deaths had taken place there, cases that had been quietly buried in history. The deeper Fraser dug, the more disturbing the connection became. Could the bridge's strange occurrences be tied to the dark history of Overtoun House? And if so, why was someone trying to cover it up? Fraser wanted answers. But the moment he pushed too hard, he started noticing strange things happening around him. His phone line was cut. His home was broken into, but nothing was stolen. And then he received another letter, this one more direct. Leave it alone or you'll be next. Fraser was no stranger to threats. But something about this felt different. It wasn't just about some old ghost stories. It felt like someone was hiding something real. Ignoring the warning, Fraser made a secret trip to Overtoun House, hoping to investigate further. What he found inside would change everything. A hidden room, sealed off for decades. Stacks of old journals belonging to the estate's former residents. And among them, a single diary entry that sent chills down his spine. It read, "She calls to them, the ones who are lost, the ones who are weak. They hear her whisper, and they follow her into the abyss." But what scared Fraser the most? The diary was dated 1895. Whatever was happening at Overtoun Bridge had been going on for over a century, and it wasn't stopping any time soon. The Overtoun Bridge deaths. Why do dogs and humans leap to their doom? Part 3. The darkest truths emerge. Detective Callum Fraser stood in the decaying remains of Overtoun House, his breath clouding in the cold, stale air. The hidden room, sealed off for over a century, was no ordinary storage space. It was a shrine of madness, a place that had been intentionally erased from history. Dust-covered journals and old documents littered the floor, their pages warped with time. But Fraser's eyes were locked on the diary he had just discovered, the one dated 1895. She calls to them, the ones who are lost, the ones who are weak. They hear her whisper, and they follow her into the abyss. A chill ran down his spine. Whoever had written this, they knew what was happening at Overtoun Bridge. Then he heard it, a whisper, soft, almost too faint to notice, but it was there, and it was coming from behind him, a house of horrors. Fraser spun around, heart pounding, but the room was empty. Just the broken furniture and crumbling walls. Still, something felt wrong. He pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the diary entry. He wasn't taking any chances. He'd seen how records conveniently disappeared. Then, he turned his attention back to the room. There were more papers, books, and ledgers stacked in an old wooden crate. Fraser sifted through them, dust filling his lungs. The documents seemed to detail the history of Overtoun House, going back to the late 1800s. And that's when he saw it, a name that sent shockwaves through him. Lady Overtoun, the forgotten mistress of Overtoun House. Fraser had never heard much about Lady Marian Overtoun, the wife of the estate's original owner, Baron John Overtoun. Most historical records focus on the Baron's philanthropy, but almost nothing was written about his wife. Yet here, in these hidden papers, her name appeared again and again. 1892, a servant vanishes from the estate under mysterious circumstances. 1893, a nursemaid is found dead at the base of Overtoun Bridge, her body shattered on the rocks below. The death is ruled as suicide. 1894, the bridge's first recorded dog death occurs. Lady Overtoun's own hunting hound leaps to its death. And then, the most disturbing record of all, 1895. Lady Marian Overtoun confined to her quarters, declared mentally unwell. No visitors permitted. But it was what came next that made Fraser's stomach turn. 1896. Lady Marian Overtoun deceased. No public record of burial. A sinister connection. Why had Lady Overtoun been erased from history? Why were there no burial records? Fraser's mind raced. Could she be the whispering voice that people had reported hearing before jumping? Was it possible that her spirit was still haunting Overtoun Bridge? Before he could process it further, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You need to stop Now, Fraser's blood ran cold. Someone was watching him. A key witness disappears. Fraser knew he had to act fast. He rushed back to his car, heading straight for Emily Cairns' home, the young woman who had nearly jumped from the bridge but was pulled back just in time. If anyone could shed light on what happened, it was her. But when he arrived at her apartment, something was terribly wrong. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the furniture was overturned, papers scattered. The kitchen table lay on its side, a half-eaten meal left abandoned. And Emily was gone. Her cell phone was still on the floor, screen cracked, as if she had dropped in a hurry. On the wall, smeared in what looked like mud or ash, were 3 words. "She is waiting." Fraser's pulse hammered in his ears. This wasn't just a string of coincidences. This was a pattern, a cover-up, and now, Emily Cairns had become another piece of the mystery. The cover-up deepens. Fraser reported Emily's disappearance, but the police department was shockingly uninterested. She probably just left town, his supervisor said. Maybe the stress was too much. But Fraser wasn't buying it. Too many people were disappearing. So he went digging, and that's when he found it. An old medical file from the 1970s, hidden deep in police archives. The file belonged to a woman named Margaret Douglas, a former psychiatric patient who had once lived in Overtoun House when it was converted into a mental institution. Margaret had been committed after claiming she was being tormented by a ghost, a woman in white who whispered to her at night. Her medical records ended abruptly in 1973. There was no record of her release, and no death certificate, just like Lady Overtoun. A chilling discovery. Desperate for answers, Fraser did something he never thought he'd do. He returned to Overtoun Bridge at night, armed with flashlight and his growing sense of dread. He walked the length of the bridge, scanning the stones for any clues. That's when he noticed something he had never seen before. Near the center of the bridge, just beneath the moss-covered stone railing, was a strange marking, a symbol, weathered by time but still visible. A circle with an eye in the center. Fraser's hands trembled as he snapped a photo. He had seen this symbol before, in the hidden room at Overtoun House. Suddenly, a gust of wind howled through the bridge, so strong that it nearly knocked him off his feet. And then he heard it, a whisper, not from behind him, not from beside him, but from below. Fraser's stomach clenched as he peered over the edge, his flashlight barely illuminating the jagged rocks far beneath. And then, for a split second, he saw something move. A figure, pale and thin, standing at the bottom of the ravine, looking up at him. And then the whisper came again. "Come home." Fraser staggered back, heart hammering. He knew, beyond a doubt, that whatever was happening at Overtoun Bridge was far more than just superstition. There was something real lurking in the shadows. And now, it knew he was looking for it. Detective Callum Fraser stumbled back from the edge of the bridge, his breath ragged. His flashlight shook in his hands, its beam flickering erratically over the ravine below. But the figure, the thing, was gone. Had he imagined it, or had it simply melted into the darkness? The wind roared again, this time carrying a whisper so soft it barely reached his ears. "Come home." Fraser turned and ran. By morning, news of Emily Cairns' disappearance had leaked to the media. Her family was frantic, pleading for answers. Reporters swarmed Overtoun Bridge, eager to exploit the mystery for headlines. Another soul claimed by the bridge? Who or what haunts Overtown? The town was in a state of hysteria. Dog owners refused to walk their pets near the area. Tourists who once visited the bridge out of morbid curiosity now avoided it altogether. Even the skeptics, those who had always laughed at the so-called curse, stayed away. Something wasn't right in Overtown. And deep down, Fraser knew this was far from over. Determined to find Emily, Fraser spent the next 48 hours tracking every lead. But the deeper he dug, the more disturbing things became. He found no credit card activity, no phone records, no sign that Emily had left of her own free will. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Then he got an anonymous tip, a single text message from the same unknown number as before. She is still in Overtoun House. Fraser's blood ran cold. He had searched the abandoned mansion already, or had he? Had he missed something? Had someone hidden Emily within the crumbling walls of the estate? There was only one way to find out. Night had fallen by the time Fraser reached Overtoun House. The air was thick with fog, swirling around the estate like grasping fingers. He stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under his weight. The hidden room was his first stop. He retraced his steps through the dust-covered corridor, pushing past broken furniture and forgotten relics of the past. The room was just as he had left it, or so he thought. Then he noticed it. A door. It was partially concealed behind a rotting bookshelf, barely visible in the dim light. He hadn't seen it before. Or maybe he wasn't supposed to. Heart pounding. Fraser pushed the shelf aside and reached for the rusted doorknob. It turned effortlessly, and what he saw inside would haunt him forever. It was a staircase, a spiraling, stone-carved passage leading deep beneath Overtoun House. He hesitated for only a moment before descending. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. His breath came out in frosted puffs. The scent of damp earth and decay filled his nostrils. Then he heard it, a soft, rhythmic humming. His blood froze. With every step, the sound grew louder. Finally, he reached the bottom, a hidden chamber carved into the bedrock, and in the center of it, sitting cross-legged on the dirt floor, was Emily Cairns. Her back was to him. Her hair was matted. Her skin was pale, and she was whispering to herself. Fraser took a cautious step forward. "Emily?" She didn't react. He moved closer. "Emily, it's Detective Fraser. I'm here to help you." Still nothing. Then, as he reached out to touch her shoulder, she suddenly turned her head, too fast, too sharp, unnatural. Her eyes were wide, staring past him into nothingness. Her lips trembled, and then she spoke. "They buried her down here." Fraser's stomach lurched. "What?" "Lady Overtoun," Emily whispered. "She was never buried in a grave. She was left down here, alone, forgotten." Fraser's pulse hammered. If that was true, then that meant... Emily's lips curled into a trembling smile. "She's awake now." Before Fraser could respond, a deafening sound shook the chamber. A scream, no, a wail, erupted from the darkness, a sound of pure agony. The walls trembled. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Then Emily's body convulsed. Her eyes rolled back. She collapsed. Fraser rushed forward, shaking her, but she was unresponsive. And then, from the darkness, a figure began to emerge. Pale, thin, wrapped in rotting white fabric. A woman, her face obscured by shadows, but her presence was overwhelming. Fraser's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't move. The woman reached out, her fingers long, skeletal, trembling. And then, in a voice like wind whispering through dead trees, she spoke. "Why did you forget me?" Fraser broke free from his paralysis just as the chamber shook violently. He grabbed Emily's limp body and ran. The walls cracked, the air filled with dust, and a horrifying wail chased him up the spiraling stairs. He didn't stop until he burst through the doors of Overtoun House, gasping for air. The mansion behind him groaned, as if something inside was furious. But Fraser didn't look back. He carried Emily away from that cursed place. Emily was rushed to the hospital, slipping in and out of consciousness. Fraser tried to explain what he saw. But how could he? What rational explanation could he give? The official report said Emily had been found in a hidden chamber, suffering from extreme dehydration and trauma. But Fraser knew the truth. Lady Overtoun had never left. She had been buried beneath her own house. And now she was awake, waiting, watching. And she wouldn't stop until everyone knew the truth. The morning after Emily Cairns was pulled from the depths of Overtoun House, the town of Dumbarton was eerily silent. People had gathered in the streets, their voices hushed, as if afraid to speak too loudly, afraid that something or someone might be listening. Detective Callum Fraser sat in his office, staring at the case file in front of him. Emily was safe. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, because Overtoun was still watching. Within hours of the story breaking, the media descended on Dumbarton like vultures. The headlines were relentless. The Overtoun curse strikes again. Woman found in underground chamber. Buried secrets beneath the bridge of death. Who or what haunts Overtoun House? Journalists swarmed the area, eager to capture the twisted horror that had unfolded. The public demanded answers. How had Emily ended up beneath Overtoun House? Who or what had put her there? Some speculated it was the work of a deranged cult, operating in the shadows of the ancient estate. Others believed the bridge's curse had claimed another victim, pulling Emily into its grasp like so many before her. And then there were the skeptics, the ones who insisted that superstition had no place in a murder investigation. But Fraser knew better, because he had been there, and he had seen her. Despite the public hysteria, the investigation into Emily's disappearance stalled almost immediately. Forensic teams scoured the underground chamber, but found no human remains. No body, no trace of Lady Overtoun. It was as if she had never existed at all. Emily, still recovering in the hospital, refused to talk about what had happened. Every time Fraser pressed her for details, she would just whisper, "She's still there." Doctors chalked it up to trauma-induced hallucinations. Fraser wasn't so sure. And then, the case took an even darker turn. 2 days after Emily's rescue, Fraser received a plain white envelope in his office mailbox. There was no return address, no postage. Someone had delivered it by hand, with trembling fingers. He tore it open. Inside was a photograph, a grainy black and white image of the hidden chamber beneath Overtoun House. And there, standing in the very center of the room, was a woman in a tattered white dress. Her face was blurred, not from poor photography, but as if something unnatural had distorted the image. But the worst part? At the bottom of the photo, scrawled in faded ink, was a single phrase. You were not supposed to find her. Fraser felt the blood drain from his face. Someone else knew, and they were watching. As weeks passed, the horror of Emily's ordeal gave birth to new urban legends. Locals whispered about the woman in white, who had been buried beneath Overtoun House and now walked its halls, searching for revenge. Some claimed to have seen her on the bridge at night, her figure barely visible in the fog. Others said she whispered to them in their sleep, calling them to join her in the darkness below. Dog walkers still refused to go near Overtoun Bridge. Not after what had happened, and not after what was still happening. Because despite the police barricades, despite the warnings, the deaths hadn't stopped. One evening, Fraser received a phone call that made his stomach turn. It was from a local farmer, whose land bordered Overtoun Estate. His voice was shaking. "There's a problem at the bridge," the man muttered. "You need to come. Now." Fraser rushed to the scene, his heart hammering in his chest. When he arrived, his worst fears were confirmed. A man was standing on the edge of the bridge, motionless, his eyes blank, as if in a trance. And before Fraser could call out to him, before he could do anything at all, the man stepped forward and plunged into the abyss below. Fraser's breath hitched in his throat. He ran to the edge and looked down, expecting the worst. But what he saw made his blood run cold, because the man's body was gone, and the only thing left behind was a single, torn scrap of white fabric, fluttering gently in the wind. Fraser stepped back, his pulse pounding. He turned his gaze toward Overtoun House, its shadow stretching across the land like an open grave. This wasn't over. Not even close. Something was still waiting, watching, calling out to the next victim. And deep down, Fraser knew the truth. It would never stop. Not until someone finally uncovered the full, horrifying secret of Overtoun Bridge. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it an eerie whisper that seemed to echo from the depths below. Detective Callum Fraser stood frozen at the edge of Overtoun Bridge, staring down into the abyss. The man who had just jumped was gone, vanished, and the only thing left behind was a single, tattered scrap of white fabric, fluttering against the stone railing. A cold shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't over. It was only getting worse. Fraser was still trying to process what had happened when his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. It was a call from the hospital. His heart skipped a beat. It was about Emily Cairns. She had been found wandering the hospital corridors in a trance, her hospital gown soaked with sweat, and she was muttering something over and over again. The nurses could barely understand her, but one thing was clear. She was terrified. Fraser rushed to the hospital, his mind racing. Had she remembered something? Had the woman in white finally revealed her darkest secret? When he arrived, Emily was sitting on the edge of her hospital bed, staring blankly at the wall. Her lips were moving, but no sound came out. Fraser sat beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Emily," he said, "tell me what you saw down there." She blinked slowly, as if waking from a nightmare, then turned her head toward him. And when she finally spoke, her voice wasn't her own. "She will never let us leave." Fraser recoiled, his breath catching in his throat. The word had come out in a low, guttural tone, nothing like Emily's usual voice. Something was wrong. The doctors told him Emily was suffering from psychogenic amnesia, a fancy term for trauma-induced memory loss. But Fraser wasn't convinced, because later that night, she disappeared from her hospital room, vanished without a trace. Her hospital bed was still warm. Her foredrip was still attached to the pole, and the only clue she left behind was a single black and white photograph, the same one Fraser had received in the anonymous letter, the same blurry woman in white. And beneath it, written in Emily's own trembling handwriting, were the words, "Help me, she's inside me." By the time news of Emily's disappearance broke, Dumbarton was in chaos. Social media exploded with theories. Was Emily taken by the same force that haunted Overtown? Had she uncovered something she wasn't supposed to? Or was she the next vessel for whatever lurked in the shadows of that cursed estate? People began avoiding Overtoun Bridge entirely. Some even moved away from the area, fearing that whatever was happening might spread. The legend of Overtoun was no longer a quiet, whispered folk tale. It had become a living nightmare. And the worst part? There was still no explanation. Why had so many dogs leapt to their deaths? Why had people felt compelled to jump? And most terrifying of all, what was really buried beneath Overtoun House? Fraser, now desperate for answers, did something he never thought he would do. He went back to Overtoun House. Alone, the air inside was thick, heavy with the weight of something unseen. Every step echoed too loudly, as if the house itself was listening. And then, from the depths of the mansion, he heard it, a voice, soft, feminine, calling his name. He turned a corner and froze. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was Emily. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale as death, and when she spoke, her voice was layered, as if two people were speaking at once. "She is awake now." The lights flickered, the air grew colder, and then, before Fraser could react, Emily lunged. The last thing he saw was her outstretched hands, reaching for his throat, and then darkness. Callum Fraser was found unconscious in Overtoun House the next morning. He was alone. Emily was never found. The police ruled it an abandoned case, claiming there was no rational explanation for what had happened. But Fraser knew the truth, because every night when he closed his eyes, he still heard her voice. And sometimes when the wind howled through the valley, carrying whispers through the trees, he swore she was calling his name. The Overtoun Bridge deaths have never been fully explained. Even today, dogs continue to leap from the bridge, their owners helpless to stop them. People report strange whispers in the wind, voices that seem to lure them toward the edge. Some say it's the ghost of Lady Overtoun. Others believe it's something much older. And a few, the ones who stood on that bridge and felt the pull themselves, they know the truth. Overtoun is still waiting, and it will never stop calling. Like, share, and subscribe for more true crime mysteries. If you found this story chilling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical true crime mysteries. What do you think? Is the Overtoun Bridge curse real? Or is there something even more terrifying at play? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, some legends never die.